In review, if you haven't already checked out my videos on how to hold the violin, how to hold the bow, and how to tune, definitely check those out. They're going to be really important for learning how to play the violin. A quick summary of those three things is you hold the violin in between your chin and shoulder, left shoulder, just like this. The most important thing is that you hold the violin upright so that it's parallel to the floor. Don't let it droop, and angle it slightly to the right like this. For now, we're going to keep our left hand up on the body of the violin. You need to have a shoulder rest if you haven't already purchased one. It's really important for holding up the instrument. Your bow grip should look like this, with your pinky on top, your fingers drooping over, and your thumb bent and pushed into the hair of the bow near the frog. And lastly, to tune, you can make big adjustments with the tuning pegs. They're the opposite of, normally we think righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Well, these tuning pegs are righty-loosey to make your pitch go down or flatten it, and lefty-tighty to tighten your string or make the pitch go up or sharpen it. The fine adjusters are normal though. They're just righty-tighty to tighten the string or lefty-loosey. A few other things that are very important. As you continue practicing, it is so important that you keep your eyes on the strings of the violin and on your bow, because you want to make sure that your bow stays in the sweet spot of the instrument, like we talked about last week, all the time, no matter if the bow's all the way here at the tip or way down here at the front. You want to do your best to keep it in the sweet spot all the time. This week, we're still not going to be adding any left-hand fingers on the violin. We're still just doing open strings. That might seem boring, but the reason we're doing that is because we need to build a very strong foundation with the bow before we put fingers down. When you start using your fingers, you're going to be so distracted by them that your bowing is not going to be as good. So this is really important. These weeks of practicing are very important to create a very strong foundation for your bowing technique and for your posture. Again, the biggest things that people struggle with: hold the instrument up, keep the bow in the sweet spot, and have a nice steady sound like this. If your sound sounds like this, work on that in your practicing to get it nice and smooth and steady. Also remember to keep your eyes on the bow so that it remains in the sweet spot, like we just said, all the way from the frog to the tip. The additional open string that we're going to add this week is the open string G. Remember, we can remember the names of the strings with the phrase get down and exit, G, D, A, E. Next week will be E, but this week we're going to add G. When you play the G string, use the same type of bowing techniques that you use with the other strings. The only thing you really need to know about bowing the G string is to keep your bow as close as possible as you can to the D string without actually playing it, like this. If you hear this, you're a little too close. The reason for that, you want to stay close, because if you get too far away, so keep the bow as close to the D string as you can when you're playing the G string without actually playing it. Last lesson, I said that we use whole bows for whole notes and half bows for half notes. Now that is not a absolute. In music, you do not always use a whole bow for whole notes. You do not always use a half bow for half notes. It's just a way to help us remember and a way to get us to practice using our half bows and whole bows. This week, in addition to half notes, which use half the bow, and whole notes, which use the whole bow, we're also going to play quarter notes, which I'm sure you've already guessed, use a quarter of the bow. And you can use any quarter of the bow that you like for this. The most comfortable place for newer players is going to be in the upper half or maybe in the middle quarter part of the bow for your quarter notes. Let's take a look at what those look like. Right here we have our whole notes that we know so well. Again, whole notes take up a whole measure. We also have our half notes, which each take up half a measure, that I would like for you to practice and play with half your bow. The new thing this week are quarter notes. A quarter note looks just like a half note, except it's filled in. A quarter note takes up a quarter of a measure. So for example, in this measure, where we have one half note and two quarter notes, in total it makes up a whole. In addition to practicing with the practice videos this week, I highly encourage you to supplement your practicing with just playing some of the open strings with whole bows, half bows, quarter bows, on the G, D, and A string this week. That would be really excellent practice for you. You also notice that when I went from a whole bow to a half bow to a quarter bow, the notes became faster. This is because when you bow, you want to keep about the same speed no matter if you're playing whole notes or half notes or quarter notes. Again, this isn't always the case, but for practicing this week, that's what I'd like you to do. Try to keep the same speed in your bow, and that'll give you a really nice steady sound as well.